Hello, everyone, and welcome to the study session of microeconomics in CFA Level 1. Last time we were talking about topics in demand and supply analysis, and today we will have a different look at microeconomics from the perspective of the firm and market structures. Overall, I would like to remind that microeconomics can be subdivided into two perspectives: consumer's perspective and firm's perspective. Consumers would like to maximize their utility in the decision-making process, and firms are maximizing their profits. Today, we are taking the perspective of firms who would like to maximize their profit for the decision-making. Let us consider four types of market structures, which are also considered in CFA Level 1. And let us proceed from most competitive to least competitive market structure. The most competitive market structure is perfect competition, which deals with many sellers who sell the same or homogeneous standardized products with very low barriers to enter, and thus no firm has any pricing power, and they also don't have any non-price competitions. The second type of market structure which we consider is monopolistic competition. The main difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition is in the fact that products can be differentiated in monopolistic competition. Because of this differentiation, there is, first of all, a non-price competition, for example, by advertising. One company advertises its product as a better product than the one produced by another company. And there can be also some pricing power because of this differentiation. However, similarly to the perfect competition, there are many firms in monopolistic competition and low barriers to enter. The third type of market structure which we consider is oligopoly. In this market structure, there are only few firms, and this is the main difference from perfect competition and monopolistic competition. Because of a few number of firms, the firms can have considerable pricing power. Indeed, consider perfect competition. If one company would try to reduce its price, it would be just pushed out of the market because it couldn't pay its own costs. In oligopoly, this doesn't happen because there are too few companies. And because of this, each company can increase or reduce its price independently of what other companies do. There can be some non-price competition by advertising, for example. However, the products are mostly homogeneous. For example, this can be cement, and the barriers to enter are quite high because of product quality, for example, which needs to be delivered. The least competitive type of market structure is monopoly. Here we are talking about one product and one company with very high barriers to enter and considerable price competition. Why considerable? Because there can be some governmental regulations for the price. And there are also non-price competitions which can be delivered if any other company would like to enter this market. First question which one needs to answer is how to decide which market structure we are talking about. The obvious answer is, of course, to consider the factors listed in the previous slide, which are the number of sellers in the market, the degree of product differentiation, the barriers to entry, pricing power, and also non-price competition. However, there is a very well-known analysis which is called Porter's 5 forces analysis. And it is interdependent with the factors listed in the previous slide, adding on it power of suppliers. Overall, we consider threat of substitutes as a factor interdependent with the degree of product differentiation, threat of entry, power of buyers or consumers, and rivalry among existing competitors. Let us start with perfect competition, and overall, let us try to answer which price and which quantity is optimal in this market. I remind that in perfect competition, we're talking about many sellers with homogeneous or standardized products, very low barriers to enter, and no pricing power, no non-price competition. In perfect competition, the first thing which one needs to distinguish is the demand curve between individual firms and market. Individual firms are price takers and they don't have influence on price. They take the price and can produce a very large quantity for this price, and also can sell this large quantity. This is a perfectly elastic situation. However, the market demand curve is still downward sloping, meaning that larger quantities mean lower prices. In the last study session, we were talking about factors which can be used to analyze the demand curve. Today, I would like to remind you about types of elasticities which can be used to analyze the demand. First type of elasticity is own price elasticity, which tells us about the percentage change in quantity purchased of a product dependent on the percentage change of the price of this product. Similarly, we can talk about cross-price elasticity, which tells us about the percentage change of the quantity purchased for the product X dependent on the percentage change of the price for the product Y. Here we can distinguish between substitutes and complements. If the elasticity is positive, meaning that one would buy more of good X if the price of good Y increases, we are talking about substitutes, the products which can be substituted. For example, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, one would try to buy more Pepsi if the price of Coca-Cola rises, and so on. If the elasticity is negative, we are talking about complements. This means that if the price of the product Y rises, also less of product X would be demanded. This can be the case, for example, with cars and winter tires. If the price of cars spikes, the winter tires can be also purchased less. The third type of elasticity which we consider is income elasticity, and it tells us the percentage change of the quantity purchased depending on the income of the consumer. Normal goods are such goods which are purchased more if the income rises, but inferior goods are such goods which are purchased less if income rises. Further, it is very important to remember that we are talking about elastic demand if some changes in price are associated even with larger changes in quantity purchased, meaning that own price elasticity should be greater than 1. Similar concept is true for inelastic demand. If price changes leading to less changes in quantity purchased, then we're talking about inelastic demand and the elasticity is less than 1. Consider total revenue, which is just a product of price and quantity. If we're talking about elastic range and the price increases, then we can say that total revenue drops. If we're talking about inelastic range and the elasticity, own price elasticity is less than 1, then we can say that total revenue grows as the price increases. Further important concept used in perfect competition is consumer surplus. Indeed, consider the quantity which consumers purchased, the quantity Q. Obviously, they paid price P for this quantity. However, there is an area which is beyond the rectangle shown by total expenditures. And this area is consumer surplus, which is the difference between how much they were ready to pay and how much they paid in reality. And it also tells us that the demand curve is also a marginal value curve, which shows us the highest price consumers are willing to pay for each additional unit. Now consider the following way to compute the optimal quantity and optimal price in a perfect competition. The demand curve is downward sloping. The supply curve is upward sloping. If we equate the quantity purchased, which should be equal in an equilibrium, we can find optimal price. And by this, we can also find optimal quantity. Note that in perfect competition, as said from the previous slide, price is constant for individual companies and it is equal to the marginal revenue and at the same time to the average revenue. It is very important to remember that in order to compute optimal prices and optimal quantities in perfect competition, one just needs to equate marginal revenue and marginal cost as soon as this point maximizes the profit of a firm. Marginal cost is shown by a dashed blue line here, while average cost is shown by the red line in the figure. The marginal revenue is horizontal because we're talking about perfect competition and shown by the horizontal line here. So let us first equate marginal revenue and marginal cost. They cross each other at the point shown in red, and that is why we can immediately say the price and the quantity to be produced. The profit which the firm obtains in a short run is shown by a blue rectangle here, which is the difference between the profit obtained, the total revenue obtained from the sales, and the average cost which the company pays. In the long run, however, the profit of the company in perfect competition would converge to zero because the minimum of the average cost curve is the intersection point between marginal cost and marginal revenue. Now let us go to monopolistic competition, and I remind that the main difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition is in the fact that products are differentiated and there is some pricing power of the firm. So we will not observe a horizontal demand curve for individual companies in monopolistic competition, but they will be downward sloping. Indeed, so we can see on this figure the same marginal curve and average cost curve shown in blue dashed line and in red line. However, the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve do not coincide anymore, and they are not horizontal. Marginal revenue and demand curve start with the same point as shown in the previous study session, and marginal revenue is lower than the demand. Similar to the perfect competition, we search for optimal quantity and optimal price by equating marginal revenue and marginal cost. So marginal cost is shown in blue dashed line, and it intersects marginal revenue at this point. Which price will be obtained by the company in monopolistic competition? Well, the demand is higher, so the demand is here. That is why the company will be able to obtain the price shown here and sell the amount of products shown here. The profit the company would obtain is again shown in the blue rectangle, and it is just the difference between the total profit and the costs paid. In the long run, again, the convergence is to zero profit because the demand curve starts to be a tangent line for the average cost curve. For the oligopoly, there will be an interesting behavior of the demand curves because different strategies can be used by companies to increase their profits. In particular, we will consider the following three strategies: pricing interdependence, Cournot assumption, and Nash equilibrium. In pricing interdependence, the following is being done by the companies. If some company reduces the price, the company can attract more customers. And that is why other companies try to reduce the price as well. Nevertheless, if some company increases the price, it doesn't increase customers. And that is why other companies leave their prices as they were. This strategy is asymmetric strategy. So there is an asymmetry between decreases in prices and increases in prices. And that is why the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve will also be different for increased prices and for decreased prices. The change will happen at so-called prevailing price. So let us again consider marginal cost curve and the average curve, as well as the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve, which are shown here for the case when prices decrease. So let us suppose that similar to the previous cases, we just equated marginal revenue with marginal cost and found the prevailing price. What happens after the prevailing price? Well, as said, the demand is asymmetric for the case when prices increase and when prices decrease. Given the prevailing price, the price elasticity will be greater if the price increases than if it is decreases. That is exactly because companies are trying to match price decreases rather than price increases. And that is why as soon as the elasticity will be greater, the demand will look like this. Thus, we will have a kink in the demand curve happening at the prevailing price. The same, however, will happen also for the marginal revenue. Marginal revenue, if the price increases, will look in the following way, shown with blue line here, and marginal revenue shown with green dashed line will be for the case when price decreases. Again, the difference happens because of changes in elasticity. So if companies match price decreases of other companies, the elasticity is lower in this case. And if their prices increase, the elasticities are greater because their prices are being matched. So there will be a kink in a demand and a marginal revenue curve for the oligopoly market for the strategy of price interdependence. Now for the Cournot assumption. The Cournot assumption doesn't assume that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Rather, it is assumed that quantities produced by different companies are the same. So just a small example for the duopoly market, we have a quantity which is downward sloping, and we have a quantity which is produced in a duopoly market. In order to compute the optimal quantities for the Cournot assumption, we need to assume that the quantities are the same. Note the following behavior between monopoly, Cournot, and competitive markets. In a Cournot assumption, the price will be lower than in the monopoly, but higher than in a competitive market. Further, we consider Nash equilibrium. In the Nash equilibrium, it is assumed that companies act in their own best interest rather than acting in the interest of the market. Indeed, if you look closely at this chart, which show price strategies and profits which each company, Arco or Batco, will obtain using these pricing strategies, you will see that if they would make the decision jointly, the highest profit would be 300 plus 500 when they both charge the highest price. However, if they make the decisions individually, for Batco, it is not optimal to hold a high price because he can increase profit by lowering his price. And that is why Nash equilibrium happens at a lower price of the company Batco and at a higher price of the company Arco. Nevertheless, if Arco agrees to share part of his profit with Batco, then the optimal solution will be again here. And this case is called a cartel because in this case there is an interdependence between profits of Batco and Arco. Arco gives part of his profit, the difference 200, for example, he gives 100 to Batco. Now we are coming to the least competitive type of market structure, which is a monopoly. We are talking about one seller with a unique product, very high barriers to enter, considerable price power and advertising power. In a monopolistic market, the crossing between demand, average cost and marginal cost will happen at the minimum of the average cost. And the optimal price can be found again by equating marginal cost with the marginal revenue and finding the demand for this quantity. The monopolistic company can sell the demand, fully satisfying it, and obtain the profit, which is just the difference between total revenue and the average cost multiplied by the quantity. There is a difference between regulated and non-regulated monopolistic markets. In a non-regulated market, one is able to maximize profit and fully profit from the demand. In a regulated market, the long-run average cost curve is equal to the average revenue and to the demand. In the competitive market, which price is even lower, price is equal to the marginal cost. In order to identify the market structure econometrically, one can observe the problem of lacking some data. The simple measures which are used for identifying the market structure are so-called concentration ratio, which measures the sum of market shares of n largest companies, or Hirschman index, which sums the squares of market shares of largest n companies. The difference between them is if the market shares of companies is very small, in squares they will be neglected, almost neglected. And if we are taking just the sum of market shares, we are considering both companies with low market shares and companies with large market shares in equal means. This is all for the firm and market structures analysis, and next topic will be aggregate output prices and economic growth.